Devil in the Cloister, the shocking Louviers, nun possession. Imagine a convent, a place supposed to be a sanctuary, twisted into a stage for the truly grotesque. Within its sacred walls, nuns claimed to writhe, seized by demons. Their minds and bodies, they said, were besieged by dark forces, compelling them to act so shocking they'd send tremors through an entire nation. This isn't some horror novel. This was the terrifying reality of Louviers. Way back in 17th century France, the quiet, unassuming town of Louviers was about to become infamous. Its hospitalier convent, home to the Sisters of St. Louis and St. Elizabeth, wasn't exactly the spot you'd link with scandal, and certainly not with demonic horror. And yet, starting around 1647, this cloistered community plunged into a vortex of terrifying claims, public exorcisms, and deadly accusations. At the very center of this storm was a young nun, Sister Madeleine Bavant. Her chilling testimony would unleash a tidal wave of panic and persecution. What followed was a truly harrowing saga of alleged demonic possession. Faith, intense fear, and accusations of witchcraft all collided, dragging priests into the fray and supposedly unleashing infernal entities, like the demon Dagon, upon consecrated ground. The Louviers' nun possession remains one of history's most disturbing and dramatic cases of mass hysteria, a dark chapter where the lines between piety, perversion, and paranoia blurred with devastating, fatal consequences. Section 1. The Spark of Hysteria. Madeleine Bavant. So, where did this all begin? The Louviers possession story really ignites with Madeleine Bavant. An orphan, she entered the convent young, around 16. Her early life was tough, and some accounts suggest she was already a troubled young woman. It was Madeleine who first lobbed the explosive accusations that would tear the convent's sanctity apart. She alleged that she'd been seduced and initiated into witchcraft by the convent's former director, Father Mathurin Picard, who by this time was already dead, and his assistant, Father Thomas Bull. And Madeleine's accusations weren't vague whispers of seduction. Oh no, she spoke of diabolical pacts, of being forced to take part in black masses, and of unspeakable acts happening within the very walls that were meant for prayer and devotion. She described visions and torments, claiming that demons, under the command of Picard and Boule, were physically and spiritually assaulting her and other nuns. Her confessions were graphic and deeply disturbing, detailing erotic fantasies and blasphemous rituals. She claimed she was just one of many victims, and pretty soon, her terror, or perhaps her influence, began to spread like wildfire. You have to picture the convent environment. It was a cloistered world, with strict religious discipline and an intense spiritual focus. It could be a real pressure cooker for psychological distress. For young women, often with little experience of the outside world, the demands of piety, mixed with that inherent isolation, could easily lead to heightened suggestibility and pretty extreme emotional states. Whether Madeleine Bavant was a genuine victim of abuse, a deeply disturbed individual, or maybe the catalyst for something much wider, her words undoubtedly lit the fuse for an explosion of fear. Section 2. The Unfolding Nightmare, Demonic Manifestations. After Madeleine Bavant's initial allegations, things inside the Louviers convent went downhill, fast. As many as 18 nuns started showing bizarre and terrifying behaviors, which seemed to back up Madeleine's claims of widespread demonic influence. And these weren't subtle afflictions either. The nuns reportedly writhed in convulsions, twisted their bodies into unnatural positions, and spewed blasphemies with a horrifying fluency. During public exorcisms, which soon became a kind of grim local sideshow, they were said to have lifted their habits, made openly lewd gestures, and screamed obscenities in voices that witnesses described as inhuman. The acts they claimed demons forced them into were profoundly shocking to the devout 17th century society. Wild stories circulated of sexual violation by demons, participation in grotesque mockeries of sacred rites, and the desecration of religious objects. The nuns confessed to carnal relations with devils and spoke of being bewitched into these states. The demon Dagon, a figure sometimes linked to pagan deities in demonology texts, was named among their infernal tormentors, adding a layer of learned occultism to the raw horror of it all. The atmosphere in Louviers became thick with terror. The possessions weren't contained within the convent walls. They spilled out into public awareness through those theatrical exorcisms. These exorcisms, which were supposed to drive out evil spirits, often did the exact opposite. They ramped up the hysteria and seemed to offer even more proof of demonic power. The entire town got caught up in the drama. The nuns' performances, and it's hard to find a better word, just reinforced the collective belief that Satan and his minions were actively working in their midst. This was an age, remember, where the supernatural was just an accepted part of reality, and the devil was a very real enemy. The Louviers nuns provided terrifyingly vivid evidence of his handiwork. Section 3. The Accused and the Accusers. At the heart of the nuns' torment, according to their testimonies, stood two men, Father Mathurin Picard, the deceased former spiritual director of the convent, and his associate, Father Thomas Boule, who was very much alive. Picard, even though he was dead and buried, was painted as the ultimate sorcerer, the one who had allegedly brought witchcraft and demonic pacts into the convent, grooming young nuns like Madeleine Bavant. His grave wouldn't remain untouched by these accusations. Father Thomas Boule, on the other hand, had to face the accusations head-on. He was portrayed as Picard's accomplice, supposedly carrying on the diabolical work. The possessed nuns specifically pointed him out as one of their tormentors, claiming he used magic to control them and bend them to the will of demons. In the supercharged atmosphere of Louviers, accusations like that were practically a death sentence. Boule, much like Urbain Grandier in the earlier Loudun possessions, found himself trapped in a tangled web of religious fanaticism, public fear, and what many historians now believe was a potent form of mass psychogenic illness. The accusers? Well, they were primarily the nuns themselves, with the articulate and seemingly tormented Madeleine Bavant leading the charge. Their testimonies, packed with lurid details of supernatural assaults and forced participation in satanic rituals, were taken incredibly seriously by church authorities and the local people. The power dynamic here was complicated. These women, cloistered and supposedly powerless, actually wielded immense influence through their claims of possession. They were capable of bringing down respected figures and throwing an entire community into chaos. Their bodies became the very battleground where the fight between good and evil was seen to be playing out. And what about the role of the exorcists and church officials? It was crucial. While some might have approached the situation with genuine concern for the nuns' souls, the public nature of the exorcisms and the often leading questions fired at the possessed could easily shape and even escalate the manifestations. The burning desire to root out heresy and witchcraft was a powerful motivator, and the dramatic proof offered by the Louviers nuns was compelling stuff for many at the time. Section 4. Trials, Tribulations, and Tragic Fates. The accusations thrown around by the Louviers nuns, especially against Father Thomas Boule and the memory of Father Mathurin Picard, kicked off a grim judicial process. Faced with such widespread and dramatic claims of demonic possession and witchcraft, the church and secular authorities felt they had to act, and act decisively. The public exorcisms had already whipped the local population into a state of fear and anticipation, and people were demanding revenge against those supposedly responsible for this spiritual crisis. The investigation and the trials that followed were, by today's standards, deeply flawed. They relied heavily on the spectral evidence, the testimonies about visions and spiritual experiences provided by the possessed nuns. In an era where witchcraft was a crime punishable by death and belief in demonic interference was rampant, the words of those claiming to be victims of sorcery carried enormous weight. Father Thomas Boule, no matter how much he protested his innocence, really didn't stand much of a chance against the flood of accusations. The evidence against him was the dramatic, often sexually charged behavior of the nuns during their fits and exorcisms, which they blamed on his evil influence. The outcome was brutal, reflecting the harsh realities of 17th century justice for those convicted of witchcraft and consorting with devils. Father Thomas Boule was found guilty and condemned. He was burned alive, a horrific end for a man accused of such dark deeds. And the condemnation didn't stop there. The body of Father Mathurin Picard, the alleged mastermind behind the convent's corruption, was dug up from its grave. In a symbolic act of purification, and to really hammer home the authorities' zero tolerance for such perceived evils, Picard's corpse was also burned. Madeleine Bavant, the initial accuser and the central figure in this whole possession narrative, didn't escape unharmed either. While some saw her as a victim, her role was ambiguous enough, and her confessions detailed enough of her own involvement in alleged diabolical practices that she too faced punishment. She was imprisoned for her part in the affair, condemned to spend years in confinement. It's a stark reminder of the complex and often contradictory ways these cases were handled. Her life, which had started with hardship, found a new kind of suffering because of the hysteria she helped unleash. The Louviers possessions left a trail of devastation, not just for the accused, but for some of the accusers as well. Section 5. Understanding Louviers: Hysteria, Repression, and Belief. Looking back at the Louviers nun possession with modern eyes, it's tempting to just write it off as superstition or some kind of mass delusion. But to really get it, we need to think about the powerful mix of factors at play in 17th century Europe. Today, historians and psychologists mostly see events like those at Louviers as episodes of mass psychogenic illness, or what used to be called mass hysteria. In a closed-off, high-stress environment like a convent, where people lived under strict rules and intense religious pressure, psychological distress could, and did, manifest collectively and very dramatically. Sexual repression is often brought up as a big contributing factor. The nuns, sworn to chastity, lived in a world that both revered and was terrified of female sexuality. The graphic and often erotic nature of their supposed demonic experiences, those erotic fantasies and unspeakable acts, can be seen as expressions of suppressed desires and anxieties. These were projected onto a supernatural framework that was readily available in their culture. The figure of the demon, especially one like Dagon, gave them a language for experiences and feelings that were otherwise totally taboo. And you absolutely cannot overstate the fervent religious belief of that era. The reality of God, Satan, angels, and demons wasn't just some abstract theological idea. It was a lived experience for most people. Witchcraft was seen as a genuine and terrifying threat, so when the nuns of Louviers claimed they were possessed, their community was primed to believe them. The public exorcisms then just cemented these beliefs, creating a feedback loop of fear and confirmation. It's also worth remembering that these kinds of events often happened against a backdrop of social and religious anxieties. Power struggles within the church or local communities could also play a part, with accusations of witchcraft sometimes being a handy weapon to discredit or get rid of people. While the specific political undercurrents of Louviers aren't as well documented as those in the Loudun case, that general climate of religious reform and the drive to maintain orthodoxy was always there. So the Louviers possession wasn't simply a case of individuals going mad. It was a complex social and psychological phenomenon, deeply rooted in the beliefs, fears, and social structures of its time. The tragic outcomes, the executions and imprisonments, really highlight how deadly serious these beliefs were, and the devastating consequences of mass fear when it crosses paths with power. So what do you think really happened at the Louviers convent? Was it genuine demonic possession, a tragic case of mass hysteria, or perhaps something else entirely? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you find these deep dives into the darker corners of history compelling, please think about liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more. Your support really helps us explore these unsettling mysteries. Conclusion. The Louviers nun possession stands as a chilling monument to a time when the boundaries between the spiritual and the physical felt dangerously thin. The convent, which should have been a haven of faith, instead became a stage for alleged demonic horror. It all culminated in public spectacles of exorcism, accusations of witchcraft, and the brutal execution of those deemed responsible. Figures like Madeleine Bavant, whether you see her as a victim, an instigator, or some mix of both, had their lives irrevocably twisted by the terrifying events that unfolded. The devastating consequences: Father Boule burned at the stake, Father Picard's corpse desecrated, and Madeleine Bavant herself imprisoned, starkly remind us of the brutal reality of how such crises were met. While modern explanations lean towards mass psychogenic illness, fueled by sexual repression, intense religious fervor, and the immense pressures of cloistered life, the terror felt by those involved was, without a doubt, utterly real to them. The story of the devil in the cloister at Louviers forces us to confront the enduring power of belief, the contagious nature of fear, and the dark potential that can fester within human societies when faith curdles into fanaticism. It remains a disturbing echo from the past, a reminder of how easily the sacred can be twisted into the profane, and how quickly accusations, once they're unleashed, can spiral into tragedy. For a time, the quiet convent of Louviers became a vortex of horror, its legacy etched in suffering, a cautionary tale for all time.